Aloha, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Fire Resilient Landscaping for Lahaina and West Maui. I'm Nani Barreto, one of the co-directors of the Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. This guide and today's webinar were co-developed by HWMO and the Surfrider Foundation, allowing us to bring together wildfire resilience and coastal community perspectives. I'll start with a brief overview of Hawaii wildfire and then hand it over to Hannah, who will share an overview of the Surfrider Foundation before Catherine and our PFX program manager, Sarah, walk us through the handbook and today's content. A little background on who we are, Hawaii Wildfire. We are a nonprofit founded in 2000. We serve communities and our practitioners statewide and across the Western Pacific, serving as the region's primary hub for everything wildfire related, minus the suppression side of things. So that includes things like wildfire preparedness information and outreach, wildfire planning, risk reduction and mitigation, fire science communication, and multi-partner collaboration and facilitation. One of our flagship programs is the Pacific Fire Exchange, which we jointly manage with University of Hawaii at Manoa's Cooperative Extension. I'm passing it over to Dr. Sarah Gabrielson, our PFX program manager, to introduce herself and that program.
Aloha, my cacao. Again, my name is Sarah Gabrielson, and as Nani said, I am the Pacific Fire Exchange Program Manager. PFX aims to improve fire outcomes in Hawaii and across the Western Pacific by pursuing, translating, and sharing fire science and research with those who are dealing with wildfire. I've been leading the Fire Resilient Landscaping Guide from the Hawaii wildfire side, and we've been partnered with Surfrider Foundation to create and release this guide. So I'll pass it to Hannah, who will tell you a little more about Surfrider.
Aloha, my kako. My name is Hannah Lilly. I'm the Hawaii Regional Manager for Surfrider Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a national grassroots nonprofit whose mission is the protection and enjoyment of our oceans, waves, and beaches for all people. So we have around 80 chapters nationwide, over 170 student clubs, and here in Hawaii, we have 3 volunteer-led chapters on Oahu, Kauai, and Maui. So we pursue our mission here really at the intersection of coastal protection and resilience, water quality, and place-based solutions that connect land stewardship with ocean health. Our work is directly impacted by fire as it relates to clean water resources, as well as coastal resilience and supporting our coastal communities. So I'm really honored to introduce Catherine Dressendorfer. She leads our Ocean-Friendly Garden program, and she's going to talk a little bit about that program as well as walk us through this resource.
Hi everyone, my name's Catherine. As Hannah mentioned, I'm the Ocean Friendly Gardens Coordinator for Surfrider Foundation, which really advocates for upstream nature-based solutions to our coastal pollution problems. Resilient and hydrated watersheds are so important as our communities face more challenges from climate change and increasing threats of wildfire, and also balancing that with protecting clean water at the coast. So mahalo for coming to learn with us today. I'm so excited you guys are all here. And I will pass it back to Sarah to run through our agenda and get us started with some context about and background about fire in Hawaii.
Wonderful. Okay, so just to orient you to today's webinar, we've nearly completed our welcomes and introductions. I'll give you a tiny bit of background on fire in Hawaii, just so that we're all on the same page. If you've attended an HWMO or a PFX hosted webinar in the past, you'll probably be familiar with this content, but I promise that'll be quick, and then we'll move to our Fire Resilient Landscaping Guide content. For the guide, we'll walk you through the sections of the guide. We'll start with the home ignition zones, how to design and maintain your yard with wildfire in mind, what it means to make fire resilient plant choices and how to do that best suited to the areas that you live in. And we'll end just with some sort of community perspective about how to work together through this space. Please use the chat throughout the presentation to ask questions. We will be gathering and collating those. And then at the end of them, we'll have ample time to address those questions. And if there are folks that want at that point to come off of mute and ask questions in person, we will also have that opportunity. Okay, so a little bit of basic understanding of wildfire in Hawaii. In 2023, the wildland urban fires were a result of long-term trends of fire in Hawaii, and those trends are still continuing today. As a percentage of area, we actually burn as much as the fire-prone Western United States on average. And the causes and conditions that have led to this occurrence really have to do with humid conditions, climate, and our vegetation patterns. So unlike the Western US, Hawaii's ecosystems are not naturally adapted to that frequent fire cycle. And that's especially because we have very few natural ignitions. So instead, actually 99% of all of our fire ignitions are human caused, primarily by accident through hot cars and various hot works, utilities, right? All these different sort of ignition points or spark points. Um, we have also these cyclical climatic patterns that contribute to our risk. This includes really heavy rain periods that are followed by long drought periods. And so this creates like a spurt of growth. And then as that vegetation dries out, especially our non-native, more fire-prone vegetation really becomes the fuel across our landscape for those ignitions. And then we also have really highly combustible buildings. So our buildings are also a large percentage of them are built in this area that we call the wildland urban interface. And both older kind of pre-modern code built homes, as well as many modern builds, like we actually saw in Southern California this past year, are still very vulnerable to wildfire and very combustible. So overall, this kind of gives us a picture of these three factors that are contributing to our fire-prone environment. So what I'm showing here is just a map of fire ignitions that took place across about a 20-year span. This map was created by collecting all of our fire agency records. And there are just a couple of things I want to point out here. First, fires are being ignited on all sides of islands, both windward and leeward. And they are across all of our islands across the island chain. So every red dot on this map is a wildfire that required a suppression response from some fire agency across our state. And then the turquoise or like light blue areas are areas of very large fires that covered many acres. Wildfires are frequently larger on the leeward sides, again, kind of corresponding to that really dried out vegetation piece. But under any conditions and under any conditions, especially as we've been seeing drought increasing across our islands, anywhere across our islands can burn. Okay, so we're set up. The reality is that wildfires occur regularly in Hawaii, but we really want to emphasize that that can happen without disastrous loss in our built environment. And there are things that are within each of our control that can greatly impact whether or not wildfires spread into our buildings and then spread building to building within our urban environment. After the fires in 2023, our community kept asking, how can we landscape with wildfire in mind? Is there anything we can do in our yard and surrounding our home to make our homes less vulnerable? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So there's a large amount of scientific data that actually supports the actions that we can take in and around our homes to help reduce the chance that our home ignites and then burns due to wildfire. So we really want to emphasize that this is an empowering message. Unlike other natural disasters, such as like a tornado where you can't deter it or guide where it goes, with fire, we can actually do a lot to prevent ignitions and burning within our homes and structures. And so this guide is really built to help with that. So we created this resource in response to our community's need, and the idea was to create a simple, practical, and locally relevant guidance for fire resilient landscaping. I do want to emphasize that while the plant recommendations in the resource are tailored towards Lahaina and West Maui, and we really wanted to emphasize kind of the urgent need for support in rebuilding and and restoring that landscape. We also have a lot of information in this guide that is applicable across all regions of Hawaii. And when we get to the fire resilient planting principles and how to make plant choices, we're going to walk you through the thought process of how you do that so that you all can use this guide no matter where you live across the islands to make wise choices for your plants and in your surrounding yards.
Yeah, and adding on to that, so Surfrider was really involved in that immediate response for water testing that followed the fires. And then as kind of recovery needs evolved, we were hearing a lot of the same kind of input from community members that were really interested in this topic. So Hannah kind of reached out and started that collaboration with HWMO, and we're so grateful that they have contributed so much expertise and really understood that we wanted to make this very approachable as a resource. So, a lot of information about fires can be very technical and kind of daunting for the average person to interpret. And so, we wanted to make it really accessible to understand and easy to start taking action. And before we get started into the nitty-gritty details of all of this, we wanted to take a minute to give a huge mahalo to all of those who were involved in this guide. We couldn't have done this without all the people up here. Dana Ina really contributed to the community education concepts, Tamara, Cheryl, and Matt Kier to our plant list and reviewing our plant list, Kaya Medeiros to our wonderful foreword at the beginning, Star Environmental for their native plant pictures and decades of expertise, and then Alzira Fernandez for doing the illustrations, and Hillary Parkinson and Paul Aranaga for their work on the Go Native database.
Great. Okay, so jumping into our guide, what is fire resilient landscaping and who is our audience? Who is this created for? So we really, again, wanted to create this guide for people that are just getting started, that are rebuilding, that are retrofitting, that are redesigning their yards with wildfire in mind. The guide is full of best practices, particularly focused on preventing that ember ignition and slowing the spread of fire in your yard to protect your home. Um, we are here in Hawaii lacking some of the flammability data specifically for our native plants. And so I do want to clarify that the plant recommendations in this guide are not fully supported by experimental data. However, there are some really key best practices that are supported by subject matter experts and have been incorporated into our recommendations. The guide is specifically designed to be accessible to anyone, our lay audience, our general public. Fire resilient landscaping is not a technical definition. This is a term that we've used to describe a suite of best practices that you can use to better prepare your homes for wildfire. And why am I so focused on ember ignition and ember awareness? Um, we sometimes think about fire as this wall of flames that's just moving through the landscape and burning everything in its path, right? Like a tsunami of flame. But the reality is that 90% of homes actually burn due to ember ignition, not due to direct flames. So embers are little tiny pieces of burning material. Sometimes they can be chunky, but they are being blown by the wind in front of the front of flames, in front of the direct flames. They're also sometimes called firebrands, and they land anywhere near and around your home, and they can ignite a new fire. Um, the same places, you can think about the places around your own home that collect lots of leaf litter. So in my house, it's like right where my lanai meets my house. There's this sort of little eddy, right, where the wind collects all those leaves. Sometimes it's in a roof angle where your roof comes together. Sometimes it's in your gutters. Those areas where leaves are collecting are the exact same places where in a big wind and high fire event, those embers will also collect. And you can imagine if they land in those little piles of leaves, that's the perfect kindling to then start a new fire. So maintaining our home and yard free of debris, free of all that leaf litter and clutter is a huge step that we can take in decreasing the chances that those areas ignite and then start a fire in and around our house. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you within the structure of home ignition zones today. And what you need to think about sort of within each zone to prevent ember ignition and to again slow that spread of fire. And I want to emphasize to you that in a really major fire with lots of embers blowing in the wind, the goal is not to prevent everything from burning. We're not suggesting that you lay out cement across your entire yard, right, and create this like impermeable and a non-combustible area. The goal is that if a clump of vegetation in one of your home ignition zones catches on fire, that it doesn't then light your home on fire and spread to other areas. So we can do this by creating these really like moist and well maintained areas of vegetation that can even act as a safe place for those embers to land and fizzle out. Your home ignition zone includes the actual building of your home. So the exterior materials that your home is made of. And then it's divided into these three zones. We consider the immediate zone from 0 to 5 feet away from your house structure. The intermediate zone would be 5 to 30 feet, and the extended zone is 30 to 100 feet away from your structure. And we also want to acknowledge that for many homes in Hawaii, they may not extend out into that extended zone. You may only have those immediate and intermediate zones that you're managing. And that's totally fine because that's where you can make the biggest impact. So you can have the most likelihood of decreasing those ignitions by starting closest to your house and working out. So for that reason, we're going to start talking about our immediate zone and including those building materials around our house. Um, so I am not going to go into details on the building materials part of this. This guide does not address that. It really is focused on the landscape. But we do just want to put in a quick plug for folks that are interested in retrofitting or rebuilding with wildfire in mind for your actual house structure. We did create a guide. Hawaii Wildfire co-created this guide with the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire program that the Headwaters Economics runs. The guide is called Building for Wildfire Resilience in Hawaii. And Headwaters Economics did a lot of research, particularly with the rebuild around Lahaina in mind. They researched available materials on the island of Maui and across Hawaii, and recommendations for how to incorporate those principles of fire resistance and fire resilience into your home. So these are all available on the HWMO website. The recommendations include things like a Class A roofing, which prevents ember ignitions on your roof. It includes things like screening your vents so that embers don't blow into your home, and many, many more recommendations that I will let you refer to in that guide. Okay, so focusing on that 0 to 5 feet around your home, this is where homes collect embers and are most likely to collect embers and catch on fire. And so this is where we can have the biggest impact by clearing this whole area of anything that is combustible, that is able to burn. We can think about some principles in this zone. We want to clear that space of anything like firewood, outdoor furniture that's flammable. We want to use materials for our pathways and walkways that are also fire resistant. You can think of like a stone pathway or gravel. And we want to put those pathways right up against our house and then put our landscaping a little bit further out. This is also actually really nice because then you get to look out your window and see the beautiful landscaping that you've included in your fire resilient home. When we think about gates or fences that are built and attached to our home, we want to replace that first 5 feet where the fence approaches the house to something that's non-combustible. Maybe it's a rock wall, maybe it's a metal fence, even chain link, something that's not going to burn and lead that fire right to your home. We want to remove all of our leaves and debris from your gutters on your roof, and then making sure that we're trimming our trees back at least 10 feet away from your roof edge to make sure that if that tree catches on fire, it's not going to drop burning branches down onto your roof. So I think that's all I have for our immediate zone, and we'll move into our intermediate and extended zones.
Yeah, so as we move further out into our yard, we have a little more flexibility with the kind of design elements we can include. And I'm going to be talking about the intermediate and extended zones kind of lumped together. That's that orange and green zone up top. We're going to keep this super high level. HWMO has a lot of great resources, including their Ready, Set, Go series. If you want to learn more about these in depth, our guide also does have do's and don'ts for both of these sections individually. So make sure to check that out. So the first strategy I'm going to talk about is including buffer zones. These can be things like fire-resistant pathways, so recycled concrete, stone pavers, gravel, even simple dirt pathways break up that continuous fuel in your landscape into kind of chunks and provide a space for embers to fizzle out. If you're on a sloped environment, you can also include things like retaining walls, again, made out of like stone or metal, little water features like ponds or creeks, and dry creek beds and rock gardens are great places as well. And whenever we have crushed rock like that, we also want to consider that we're going to need to maintain it and keep it free of weeds. Next, let's talk about trees. Trees are really great for these zones that are further away from your house. Again, I'm talking 5 to 100 feet out, but we want to keep a couple things in mind. First of all, we do want to keep our mature, healthy trees. Don't go out and cut down all your trees. Trees are super important to help shade out weeds and invasive grasses and kind of keep your yard a little cooler, a little shadier, easier to keep hydrated, keep that soil moisture in your yard. So if you have something like an invasive eucalyptus or a pine tree, you might want to swap that out for a better option, and we'll talk a little bit more about plant choices later. But again, don't feel like you have to go get rid of all your trees. Trees can, again, even help catch those embers, those windblown embers, and let them safely fizzle out so they don't reach your home functioning as a green break. For maintenance, we want to remove ladder fuels like you see on these pictures on the left. So that's things like vines that climb from the ground up into the tree canopy, and things like palm tree skirts that again connect the top of the tree all the way down to the bottom. Trees are generally pretty fire resilient and resistant at their base with that thick woody trunk. But when we have things that allow it to fire to climb up into the leafy canopy, it can get pretty dangerous because the trees can spread from treetop to treetop. So we can trim or limb up our trees by cutting off the lower branches at the base of the tree. A good rule of thumb is about 6 to 10 feet for our mature trees, something that you can easily walk underneath. And for younger trees that are growing, that's going to be like about a third of the total height as it grows. So a lot of people have lawns. So let's talk about lawns. We want to keep our grass mowed to about 4 inches. That promotes deeper root growth, keeps it more drought tolerant and easier to keep well hydrated. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our water-wise tips section. We want to avoid what it looks like in this picture in the top right, where it's brown, yellow, crunchy, tall. That really allows your invasive weeds and invasive grasses to go to seed and makes it a problem not only for your yard, but also any neighboring wildlands or any neighbors right next door. They're going to be dealing with those weeds as well. One big note here is that we don't want to use power tools like mowers and trimmers in hot, dry, windy weather, because things like mowers have metal blades underneath, and if that hits something like a rock in your landscape, it can very easily start an ignition on accident and start a fire on your lawn. It's a really good practice to have a low-tech solution like a water bucket or an extinguisher nearby. And again, stay on top of maintenance. So if you know a hot, dry spell is coming, mow first and stay on top of the grass height. And in general, maintenance is really key to a fire resilient landscape. Design and plant choice is important to set us up for success, but your landscape is a living system. It's going to be growing and evolving, and it needs your hand in it to take care of it. So we call these concepts lean, clean, and green. Lean involves all the living plants and trees. That's keeping them pruned, making sure they're not growing into our buffer zone pathways. And again, not every individual plant needs space around it. It's okay for plants to touch. It's okay for plants to be in clumps and in drifts, especially if they're ground cover. Again, this can help with shading out those invasive weedy species. But it's still good to, if you have a designated pathway, and also keeping vegetation again out of that 0 to 5 foot zone. So clean is all about removing the dead stuff. So weeds, dying parts of plants, also clutter in the yard. If you have like toys or patio furniture, it's good to keep that to a minimum, put away what you can inside your house, and again, keep structures like sheds and other outbuildings clear of clutter around them. And green, we want to keep our plants hydrated and green and also plan for how rainwater is going to move through our landscape. So how do we keep our plants green while also balancing water conservation? Hydrated plants are super important for fire resilience, but water is a precious resource across the islands. We want to, again, ourselves up for success by choosing drought-tolerant and climate-adapted plants. We want to downsize our grass lawns where we can, so thinking about them more as area rugs where we're spending time than wall-to-wall carpet, and grouping any thirsty plants together. So it's going to be easier to keep on top of high water needs plants if they're in the same area and not kind of spread out throughout your yard. And when we're watering, we want to think about watering deeply and less often. If you have a lawn, that can be watering one day for 15 minutes instead of 3 days for 5 minutes. Watering early in the morning, and again, adjusting our water seasonally. So we're watering a little bit more during that dry season and a little bit less when it's rainy or cooler. The easiest way to stay on top of this is with hand watering because you can direct water individually to each plant where it needs to go and adjust seasonally for when it's drier or wetter. But if you have a larger yard, drip irrigation and high efficiency sprinklers are also good options. If you have a sprinkler system already in place too, swapping for the high efficiency rotator heads is a really easy and cheap way to save water because less of it's getting sprayed off into the air. And we can also use rainwater to our advantage. So why should we plan for rain? So most yards are designed to be flat and funnel water really quickly away from your property as fast as possible. But this also carries all the pollution from your roof, from streets that builds up during dry weather, and carries that from those hard surfaces out into waterways and the ocean. This can impact coral, marine life, and even increase bacteria levels and get us sick at the beach. So after fire events, this problem is even worse because rain sheeting off a really flat landscape with no vegetation can cause erosion and mudslides, and even carry pollution from burned areas down into the watershed. But we can plan for this and we can turn this pollution problem into a resource by making spaces for rain to spread out, slow down, and sink in. We can create things like swales and bioswales, which you see in the pictures here. These are kind of creek-shaped trenches that give water that space to spread out and sink in. Adding little berms, which are like little hills. If you have gutters, you can direct your downspout into a swale or a rain garden or directly into a rain barrel or cistern and save that rainwater for later to water your plants. And we can also take care of our soil health by planting deeply rooted native plants and adding things like compost and biochar, which help make that healthy, biologically active soil that acts like a living sponge, which is ready to soak up water and extra nutrients. If you're going to plant edible plants, there's just a couple things you want to keep in mind. We want to keep our garden beds at least 5 feet from our house outside of that immediate zone, using non-combustible materials like the metal garden beds in this picture, avoiding wood chip mulch both for fire and for coconut rhinoceros beetle, which is an invasive pest that attacks coconut and palm trees. And edible plants in general tend to be a little bit more high maintenance, so we want to stay on top of watering and weeding. And if you are in an area that burned or adjacent to an area that burned and you're concerned about contaminated soils on your property, we really recommend that you seek out more testing or opt for raised beds where you can bring in soil that you know is clean. Okay, now we're going to talk about plants. Yay! So post-fire, there's been a lot of confusion and misinformation and fear around plants in our landscapes, especially near our homes and structures. But removing all the plants in the name of reducing fuels can actually work against our goals of fire resilience. We need healthy, hydrated landscapes to be better prepared for climate extremes and future fire events. I want to emphasize that there are no 100% fireproof plants. Any plant can burn in the right conditions, especially if it is dead or neglected. But we can look at plant characteristics to decide what is a better fit for fire resilient landscapes. So to make our plant list, we looked at expert input on green breaks, species for green breaks from Pacific Fire Exchange. We looked at what's locally available and relatively easy to find in a local nursery or store. We also looked at plant origin, whether it's native or non-native, and plant characteristics like leaves and growth form. So our plant list is, again, it's not exhaustive. It's just kind of a jumping off point and more of an inspiration to help you get started. And so we kind of wanted to let you in on that thought process of how we chose these plants so you can help make those decisions in your own yard. So the first one we're going to talk about is plant origins. Um, Considering if the plant is adapted to the region that you're planting it in. If it's native to the region you're planting in, it is going to be better set up for success. It's going to need less extra water, less extra help to thrive. And this can vary also not only just based off of what's native to your island, but also what is native to the region you're planting it in. So what might be a good fit on one side of the island might not be a good fit on the other side. And again, we looked at whether things were native or non-invasive. This dragon tree yucca on the right side is a great example of a non-native but not invasive plant, and it also has that great trunk, no ladder fuels underneath, and those nice drought-tolerant leaves. So why should we avoid invasive species? The simple answer is that they contribute to fuels building up around our landscapes and in our environment. So they spread rapidly because nothing's eating them. They often don't break down easily and aren't compatible with our soil chemistry, and nothing's eating them. So those leaf litters are also building up over time. Even like eucalyptus trees, their leaves prevent other plants from growing in those spaces. And they can also escape into surrounding areas and make more problems to manage in our wildlands. So why native plants? Why do we want to offer native plants when we can? They're not invasive, so we're not introducing new problems or new pests. They're connected with our local herbivores and decomposers and soil, so they're getting eaten at all stages of their life and being recycled back into the environment. They're better adapted to our climate because they evolved here, and they support native wildlife, biodiversity, and also our human uses. I also want to mention that for native plants, not every native plant is going to be a good fit, again, in every region, and not just because it's native doesn't naturally mean that it is fire resilient. Okay, so one of the characteristics we're going to look at is the plant leaves. When we touch the plant leaf of a fire resilient plant, it might feel kind of waxy or leathery, kind of supple to the touch. What you're feeling there is a waxy cuticle that actually helps the plant keep more moisture inside and lose less to the environment. So it's helping that plant stay hydrated and keep more of its moisture. That can be something like a banana or a tea leaf, which is also why you see them used in cooking because they keep all that moisture wrapped up in a nice little package, and they don't burn easily. They might also have a squishy, succulent kind of feeling when you touch the leaf, like an aloe. That's because the plant is storing water in its cells, like little bags of water in there. And it might have a kind of a sturdy, tough feeling, or even a fuzzy texture that acts like a blanket to keep that moisture in. And why do we care about moisture so much? You wouldn't try to start if you're making a bonfire when you're camping, you wouldn't try to start that with like damp firewood or wet matchsticks. It wouldn't go that well because it takes a lot more energy to ignite something when it's wet because it has to dry out first. So that's why we are looking toward things that stay hydrated. And part of that is staying green even when it turns to dry, hot weather, so it doesn't immediately turn brown and crispy. For not fire resilient choices, we're looking at things that are kind of crunchy, dry, papery leaves. And when you touch it, it might leave kind of a sappy, sticky feeling. That's kind of oils and resins within that leaf. A good example are pine or juniper. They also have a very distinct smell because of their volatile oils. And that again contributes to them being pretty flammable. And another characteristic we want to look out for is if this plant dries out quickly. That fountain grass in that picture there, as soon as the weather turns, they're going to be really dry and crunchy. We can also look at the growth form of the plant, which is the shape that the plant takes. We want to look for things that don't create a lot of leaf litter. They're not shedding leaves all the time. It has like a trunk or kind of an uncluttered base. Again, we can see tea is a good example of that. where that gets back to that idea of ladder fuels, where it's lifted up, fire can pass underneath it safely and not spread into the vegetation. Or ground covers are also a good option because of what we talked about with shading out weeds. Having a slower growth or regrowth when you cut it is actually good because it's going to help you keep on top of maintenance. You're not going to have to be cutting it back constantly to stay on top of it and keep open spaces. And if the structure doesn't trap a lot of leaf litter, and we'll talk about an example of that coming up. Um, what we want to avoid are plants where material really easily builds up at the base of the plant or it has a lot of dry underbrush or almost like a hollow structure inside. That picture on the right, you can see that only the outside is green, the inside is all brown and hollow and twiggy. So we want to avoid that because material can build up underneath. Similar to naupaka, naupaka is great for sand dunes and collecting sand underneath, but unfortunately, if it's planted in a yard, it also collects a lot of leaves underneath and debris. So if you have that plant, you just want to be mindful of getting under there, scooping all that out or blowing it out, or trimming up the plant itself and shaping it so it's more of that kind of upright structure. And again, plants that are growing rapidly when they're cut and trimmed are going to be hard to keep on top of. And again, plant species is not the only thing in play here. Here we have two a'ali'is showing you how much maintenance matters. So the one on the left is a little more purple variety, but the thing that jumps out to me immediately is that like the whole right side of the plant looks like it's almost dead. All that dead, dry material, and then we look at the base, there's all this kind of clutter and twigs and branches and leaves built up along the bottom. The branches, the lowest branches are also almost touching the ground and the wood mulch there. We can also see it's not planted in the best area. It's in that immediate zone right next to a window. So we can see that this one is not doing that good. It doesn't look that hydrated. It's also worth mentioning that this plant on the left is in Southern California, so it's a little bit outside of its local climate adapted context. We look at the plant on the right, it looks happy, it looks healthy, it looks green. It looks like it's being super well taken care of. There's no dead or dry material kind of hanging on there. It's been really nicely limbed up at the bottom and kind of pruned so we can see that trunk and it's kept above those lower vegetation at the bottom. And again, looks super healthy, hydrated, and well maintained and cared for. And I'll pass it
Awesome.
back to Sarah.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so we are going to use those plant characteristics that Catherine just introduced to us and talk about a couple of examples. So at the end of the guide, there is a list of plants that we have put together that are fire resilient species that are, again, adapted to Lahaina and West Maui. But you can use these same characteristics to identify other species that are not on that list, but that may be appropriate for the area that you live in or where you're planting. So I'm going to give you just a couple of examples to walk through kind of this logic. So one example would be Uhaloa or Waltheria indica. This is a native species. It's got these kind of fuzzy, tough leaves. That fuzz actually helps it retain that moisture. You can also look up these plants on a number of different resources. So the one that I've included a screenshot here is through the Go Native resource database. I can look up Uhaloa and I can see that there is actually quite a wide variety of climate zones in which it's adapted. So if my home was located in one of those climate zones, that would be appropriate. I can also see that it has some level of salt tolerance, that it has quite low water needs, that it's quite drought resilient. So these are all characteristics that would lead me to identify this as a fire resilient example. Another example we're going to talk about is plumeria. So this is an introduced species that is not native. And so we want to make sure that when we're contemplating using introduced species, that we also look for some resources about whether they're invasive or not. So I'm going to put this species into the Plant Pono website. Again, this is a screenshot of the Plant Pono website, and you can see that it comes out as a low risk for invasibility. So that is beneficial. We know that this species is not a threat to sort of increase invasiveness across our islands. Plumeria has these tough, leathery leaves. They stay dry. It is drought and salt resistant. We can also see that we can prune this tree and limb it up so that it has that growth form that Catherine has been identifying, so that we have space between any kind of ground fire that would be along the ground and it reaching up into those canopies. Okay, and so two examples of plants that we would want to avoid and why. Our first example is Lantana chimera. This is actually a really commonly cultivated plant in a lot of people's gardens. If we look up lantana on our Plant Pono website, we find that it is very high risk. This is actually a very highly invasive plant across our islands. Um, it does have pretty tough, leathery leaves, but it also contains pretty high volatile oils. They're quite smelly, they're quite pungent. Although it's drought tolerant, the growth structure creates this real sort of catchment system for a lot of clutter and dry leaf and any debris to catch under there. And it's got big thorns, creates these dense thickets that are really difficult to remove. So this would be a plant that we would want to avoid for fire resilience. Another plant we would want to avoid is golden bamboo. Again, we're going to look it up on the Plant Pono website and see that it has high risk for invasibility. For this species, it is not super widespread, but we know that a lot of other species in the same genus are very widespread and have caused problems across our islands. The growth structure is really problematic for fire resilience. It creates this kind of catchment system for all of its dry, papery leaves, where it slides down into those stalks, as you can see on that first picture, and is really difficult to maintain in a way that would be fire resilient. So this is a plant we would definitely want to avoid. So again, these are just ways to kind of think through those characteristics of fire resilience and how you can apply them to plants that you might be considering or have in mind for your landscaping. We have a few other tools that are included in the guide. This includes some plant inspiration. So these are example landscape layouts. Again, a plant list with recommended plants and information about why they might be beneficial for fire resilience. And we have an entire page of resources. If you're looking for more information on these species or on water-wise tips or on our home hardening, you can reference all of the resources. I'm just going to go through a couple of little highlights from the guide. So these are our landscape sort of inspiration diagrams. This one is for a low water needs garden. This would be a great layout for a place like West Maui, which is more of that coastal arid climate zones. So this is a whole little suite of species that are adapted to that area, that are drought resilient, drought tolerant, and that have some different characteristics. So you can see some ground covers, you can see some kind of mid-sized shrubs and then taller shrubs. Again, making sure that those taller shrubs like that a'ali'i in the back is kind of limbed up, has that space to the ground. And then we also include things like that rock pathway that's going to create that buffer between our different planting zones, and really show you kind of ways that we can use our landscape to think through these fire resilient principles. And then we also have an example for the high water needs garden. So this would be sort of appropriate for if you live in a climate zone that has a little bit more water. Maybe if you are near a stream bed or close to an area where you have access to more water, or if you're growing food and you want to be more intentional about putting water on your landscape to grow that sustenance. This garden includes some food species. It also includes some native species that might be more adapted to maybe shadier areas under those trees, like the uki uki, and great for climate adapted zones that are a little bit more wet.
Yeah, and so at the also included within our guide is this kind of condensed plant list. So it has all of the species, and then it has some notes about the plant origin, as well as salt tolerance, phytoremediation, and water needs. So our water needs are low, medium, and high. This is again relative to West Maui. So low would be that it can survive on rainfall. Medium is that you're going to maybe help it out a little bit through the dry season, and high is going to be that you're kind of watering it year round consistently. Salt tolerance, some plants are adapted to be tolerant to salty environments and can grow in salty soils, no problem. So we included those because they're adapted to these coastal places and beachfront areas. So if you live close to the beach or are definitely on salty soils, those are great options for you to use. Anywhere getting sea spray as well. And then phytoremediation. So we talk a little bit about phytoremediation in the guide. This is a process that uses plants to trap or absorb pollutants from the soil into the plant. Um, we included this because there was a lot of community interest in this, especially during talks about contaminated soils. It is a very like nuanced topic. There's still a lot of ongoing research about plants. So if it's not marked as phytoremediating, it might be because there hasn't been research done on that specific plant yet. Um, and again, this is kind of a plant-specific process. So some plants store pollutants in their bodies and have to be collected of safely and disposed of in a specific area or off-site. Other plants just convert pollutants into safer forms that are less harmful for us to be around. So if you're interested in this topic, we kind of included it as a jumping off point. There are some extra resources at the end of the guide about phytoremediation. And also you can check out our extended plant list, which covers the same species list that's in the resource, but it is a spreadsheet that also has information about sizes of plants, whether they do well in shade or sun, growing notes, as well as kind of what pollutant it targets in phytoremediation. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check these out. This is also linked within the guide itself, and at that short link there. Oh, one more thing about this. Also, again, this plant list was tailored for West Maui, but it is still relevant across the islands. So definitely check it out if no matter where you live. And if you do live somewhere else and you're looking for a very specific plant for your yard and you're ready to use your new plant knowledge, you can go check out the Go Native database. It's a really awesome resource. You can put in your climate zone. You can put in what kind of area of your yard you're looking to fill, like part sun, shade, anything like that. How much water you're looking to spend to use on that area. And it has lots of great pictures, not only of the plants themselves, but often them in yards, so you can get a sense of what they look like. And again, if you're looking at non-native options, definitely check plant pono first. Find out if it's invasive or high risk. Even if a plant pops up as being high risk or invasive, they'll give you some low risk options underneath, some kind of like alternatives that might fit a similar niche in your yard. And you can even find lists of low risk plants if you want to just look for inspiration. We have lots of great resources again at the end of the guide. We really picked these very specifically to be locally relevant and helpful. So we didn't put anything in here randomly. Please check it out. It includes things like Grow Aloha, which they do free native plant giveaways across the islands. Maui Nui Botanic Garden has been on there as one of those kind of hubs of distribution. We have tree and plant pruning guidance if you want to learn more about that and how to keep your trees and plants healthy while you're pruning them, tips for contaminated soils, and a little bit more about that phytoremediation topic, as well as that home hardening guide that we mentioned at the beginning if you're looking to retrofit parts of your home. And there's also Firewise community resources, which HWMO helps facilitate, and they can help you if you want to start a Firewise community in your neighborhood.
Great. So I'll just bring us home on that topic. We really just want to emphasize that all of these principles are great when you're doing them by yourself in your own home, but they're even better when we are working together. When we can work as a neighborhood and start to really think about our landscape beyond what's on our property lines, again, because often those property lines and those, home ignition zones are overlapping with our neighbors. And then if we can start to think about it on our community level, this is when we really get into creating stronger and safer communities across our islands. So if you're interested in collaborating with your community, we would really encourage you to think about joining a Firewise or starting a Firewise community in your area. Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization runs the Firewise program across our islands and can offer lots of support for getting started with that process and really thinking about these concepts kind of on that larger level and with lots of people working together. So with that, I think I'll say huge, huge mahalo to all of you for coming today, for sticking with us, for listening to all of those details down into the nitty gritty and up into that kind of 30,000 foot view of fire in Hawaii. So please check out the guide. Let us know if you have questions. We do have a good chunk of time here for questions. You can stick them in the chat, and we will also have the opportunity for folks to raise their hand on Zoom to ask questions. I think we'll start with a couple of questions that have come in through the chat, and then we will go from there and respond to any of our community who's raising their hands. Yeah, so please use that tool on your Zoom. And Catherine, we can get started on some of these questions.
Should I stop presenting?
Yeah, why don't you do that? We can look at each other. If you feel free to also come off of or turn your video on and join the conversation, be a little bit more of an active participant during this section. And just give us 1 second to get on the same page here. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. We had some questions just back at the very beginning of our conversation. There was one question around an image that shows the home ignition zones on a smaller parcel level with larger homes that more closely reflect development in the Lahaina and West Maui area. We do not have that image currently, but there has been a lot of interest in creating something that's a little bit more aligned. I know also people across all the islands, a lot of folks here in Oahu, I'm based in Oahu, have been asking that as well. And so that is of interest, I think, across many of our fire risk communities, particularly. So we are considering that, and that would be sort of further development, working with it and more illustrators and like that. So not yet, but it's on our mind. Um, Catherine, do you want to take this one? The question is, are native plants always a better decision for planting for fire resilience in Hawaii?
Yeah, so not always. There's almost no blanket statements when we're talking about fire resilience. Um, it really depends on the plant itself. Again, what we talked about in the growth form and structure. Hawaii is really unique in that there are not a lot of natural sources of ignitions besides like lightning and maybe lava and volcanoes. And those are pretty infrequent. We're not seeing things like in a lot of the Western US, plants are different, adapted to different kind of fire regimes and cycles where they're used to fire coming through every 30 years or every 100 years. Um, and maybe that even includes them burning and resprouting from that. So it's not resilience in like the terms that we would be thinking of where we're trying to kind of lower those ignitions in the first place. And in those cases, like where the plant would burn to the ground and resprout. So those are like kind of what we're looking at in like the Western US. And then so in Hawaii, we have a lot of also nuance in what is considered a native plant. So there's endemic plants that evolved on the islands. There are canoe plants that were brought in by Polynesians. And there's a lot of diversity within those. And so, and a lot of these plants are adapted to very specific regions. So wetter, cooler regions where they might dry out quickly because they're used to sustaining a lot of rainfall. So again, really look at where you are specifically on the island, where your region is, and kind of go from there from looking at leaf characteristics and growth form and what might be a good fit. And also, this is all going to be a balance of like what you want in your yard and what you can maintain. So yeah. Yeah. Oh, also, I should say native plants are incredibly important also for wildlife and biodiversity and maintaining that and maintaining those cultural connections as well. So that's why we're really big on emphasizing that. And then for our ocean-friendly gardens perspective, we are also really supportive of native plants because they use less fertilizers and less pesticides. So we're getting less of those water pollution factors. Yeah. I hope
Great.
that answered that
Thanks.
question.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, there are a bunch of questions around the resources. I've just put a link to the resources page in the chat, so that is available. And then we will also be posting the recording of this with the slides on our website. Right when I stuck it in the chat, there was a question about whether it would be available on the County of Maui Recovery website. I'm not sure the answer to that question. If the County of Maui is interested in hosting that or in having that available, please be in touch. You can reach me at sarah@hawaiiwildfire.org. And we'll put our contact information in as well.
I also see
Um,
someone dropped the resource list in the chat. That is available as a PDF on its own as well. Yeah.
yep, yep, absolutely. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna send it back to you, Catherine. There's a question about where can we get these native plants?
Yes. Does Grow Native have a plant directory on there? I cannot remember.
I would have to double check as well.
Okay. If you're on Maui, Maui New and Botanic Garden is a wonderful resource. Also, Tree Covery has on their website partnered with, I want to say it's UH Manoa. I'm not sure. They've partnered with a local university that are doing free plant giveaways. So if you were in an area that was affected by the 2023 wildfires, you can request free native plants through there. Um, also, I mean, there has been a lot of talk
I
about Ace and Home Depot, and I think Hannah might want to jump in for this.
I was just gonna say, so Native Nursery is one of the main growers in Maui, and they distribute to Ace up in Kula, which is further, obviously, if you're in Lahaina. Home Depot generally has a pretty good selection of native plants as well. But yeah, Catherine kind of went through most of them.
And again, that
yeah,
Grow Aloha resource, they do periodic giveaways. They have hubs on each island, and the places where they give away the native plants often sell native plants too.
Yeah, similarly, I would echo the Botanic Gardens line. Arboretum also has native plant sales regularly on Oahu. Generally, you want to be looking for, yeah, for some of these species that are a little bit more difficult to find, you want to be looking for a native plant nursery specifically. But like Hannah said, a lot of the species that we included in the plant list are quite readily available. They aren't super challenging to get. And so one of the sort of emphasis that we put on this guide is that we wanted species that were available for everyone and anyone. Okay, let me see. We have a couple of questions around soil. Um, there's a question about, okay, so there's questions about contamination of soil. We do include some resources in the on the resources page, sorry, that are around getting our soil tested. We know that this has been a barrier for some of our community members. And so I just want to acknowledge that we don't have a silver bullet solution to that at this point. Some of the suggestions have been to make sure that we are importing some non-contaminated soils, if you're concerned about that or worried about that. And they're kind of different approaches depending on what sorts of contamination you're experiencing. So again, I want to emphasize that there are some testing resources and this is not sort of a perfect solution. And I don't know if our community has other resources for folks concerned about their soil contamination, but please feel free to add those to the chat as well. As far as getting compost and soil, I am not, the question was, are there resources to get compost and add nutrients to soil in the burn zone? And Hannah, I don't know if you have other Maui specific recommendations for that. I don't know any off the top of my head.
Well, did you mention West Maui Green Cycle?
Nope.
You did. Catherine's nodding.
I thought it was in our
Um,
resource thing, but now I don't know.
Oh, it might be. It might be on the resource
it
list.
is.
Oh, it is. It is under, sorry, it's under sustainable landscaping practices on the resources and tools. It's under neighborhood and school compost collection. West Maui Green Cycle does a neighborhood collection and also is a source to get finished compost.
Also,
Great.
as far as soil testing, I think so. Following debris removal, the Army Corps and DOH did the soil sampling. So if your home was within the burn zone, there should be results that you were provided at that time. If you need help interpreting those, I think Department of Health would be the best resource to assist in interpreting that.
Also, I know that there was talk about mulch. Believe us, there is a lot of ground cover and composted wood chips. Um, Definitely on the nuances of mulch, composted wood chips and composted trimmings are going to be better than like the kind of play bark wood chips that you buy at the store. Those are dry, they don't break down, the like dyed ones that you get in a bag. Want to avoid those definitely. If you're looking to add nutrients to your soil, again, compost is a great option. If you are going to do any kind of like chop and drop, make sure that that is not getting dry during the summer season. Um, and again, there was a little bit of talk about biochar as well. Biochar is like kind of a charcoal product that acts like a little microbe hotel. So it gives space for those microbes to take up residence in your soil and keep your soil healthier. So those are some options. We know it's kind of tricky. We definitely want to keep mulch out of that 0 to 5 zone for sure if you're going to prioritize actions. And then be mindful about coconut rhinoceros beetle. Keep an eye out for them when you're out and about.
Yeah, that's what I would just really emphasize, is that to make sure that our mulch is staying below the limits of that kind of nesting and grub habitat for coconut rhinoceros beetles. So referring to that's not our expertise, but is a lot of really great material on coconut rhinoceros beetle and the prevention of that. So making sure that you're taking that into account when you're working with mulch. Great. There was also a question. That said, what do you think of breezeway blocks for home or lanai building? Um, I don't think I quite understand the question. I don't know if the person that asked that wants to come off of mute and clarify. Would be happy to take that question.
Hi, my name is Yayoi Hara. Thank you so much for hosting this. Breezeway blocks it was really popular as a building material in Hawaii, and they're the blocks that you often see at entryways. And so it's not a solid block, but it has the opening. Sometimes it's a flower pattern or some kind of a design so that the breeze can come through.
Yeah, yes, I have the image now. Thank you. Um, yeah, as long as you're keeping them clean, right? So a lot of times, or the ones that I'm thinking of, are often sort of like brick or cinder block kind of material, cement material, that are in those like flower structures or like
Yes.
other sort of decorative. Yeah, so a leaf blower is a really great tool for this.
Mhm.
Something to keep all of those little pockets clean, right? The smaller the pockets, the kind of more they tend to collect those little debris piles. So that's all I would say is that it just takes sort of an awareness around the maintenance of those areas, and making sure that those areas aren't collecting that kind of like little kindling debris that's going to catch on fire if an ember were to land there. Yeah.
Thank you. And actually,
Yeah.
I also wanted to do, you were talking about biochar. I wanted to do a plug for Haleakala biochar. Karen, I see also recommended it. Yeah, Haleakala biochar, they produce on island and they are cutting back invasive eucalyptus to produce their biochar. So all around great company and available, I think up at Kula Ace Hardware, but you can contact them directly.
Great. Thank you for that. I have just started brainstorming an idea that I'm going to spitball here. But I think that this kind of like community sourcing of resources is absolutely fantastic and would love to kind of have somewhere to like catch or collect that information. So I don't have a perfect solution for that, but maybe we'll think about a way to stick up sort of like a living document or something on the PFX website and really sort of be able to yeah, just contain some of these great community suggestions because that's exactly the kind of conversations that we're hoping to cultivate through this guide, and kind of putting people in touch with each other and really pulling on these resources. So mahalo.
Thank you.
I was thinking the same thing when someone dropped in the chat their recommendations for native plant nurseries. I was like, oh, that would be great.
Right. Right. There was a question about biochar that Catherine just answered in the chat. It's a soil amendment that helps improve moisture and soil health. It's often created by reducing or charring some kind of wood or organic material, and often has other additives such as compost or nutrients that kind of help with water retention and soil nutrients and supplementing our soil.
Yeah, it's basically special charcoal that is produced at a high pressure. And yeah, again, it creates the little kind of porous, it's very spongy at a microscopic level. And so it has all these little kind of spaces for microbes and healthy soil things to take up residence and help your soil health. Yes. Okay. Any
And
other?
I've also
Yeah.
heard that it is good for the phytoremediation, that it actually helps to attract the heavy metals.
Yes, I don't know what about any specific heavy metals, but again, I think that yeah, biochar is being talked a lot about for soil contamination.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Any of our community members want to come off of mute and ask a question or raise your hand? We're yeah, welcome to join the conversation. And we had thought that this might be an ample time for questions and answers. So we can certainly wrap up a little bit early here, but I do just want to give a little bit of time if people are percolating on things. Also to please just go ahead and look through the guide yourself. You'll see that the sections of the guide are kind of organized as we gave this presentation, but there's a ton more details and information. There's a bunch more fun illustrations. There's great examples of different plant species that might get your creative juices flowing and thinking about colors of flowers and fun growth forms and all kinds of good stuff. So yeah, just want to say please check it out and give your feedback. And please reach out to both myself and Catherine, to Surfrider and to Hawaii Wildfire and the Pacific Fire Exchange Program. If you have questions, our emails just got pasted in the chat, and we are here and available for ongoing conversation. So really hoping that this is kind of the starting point for a lot of these conversations and engagement throughout.
Yes, thank you guys all so much for listening and being part of this. And definitely we're really open to any kind of feedback of what people are interested in, what would be helpful for future iterations if we make a kind of inter-island version.
Yeah, I'll just give a plug for that. We've gotten a bunch of questions from folks all over the place saying, "Ooh, can you make one of these for Kula? Ooh, can you make one of these for Waianae? Ooh, can you make one of these for Kohala?" And so we know that there is lots of interest as far as that kind of yeah, question goes. I will say that again, sort of we're hoping with this webinar to sort of like provide these tools for you all to be able to curate and think about those lists yourself. And we are also thinking about that. So we don't have a plan of action yet to identify and address what that might look like. But there is sort of a conversation. And if you are a plant person in any of those places, a master gardener or just a layperson who has plant interest and want to kind of contribute or help with a process like that, yeah, please let us know. And we hope to kind of, again, continue those conversations or start those conversations.
And thank you, Sarah, for putting that in the chat for Maui Master Gardeners. They have like an advice line, I'm pretty sure, where you can ask about soil testing, planting, pruning, fertilization, all this great stuff. That was mentioned in the Dealing with Contaminated Soils resource that we linked. They said, don't try to do DIY soil testing. Please reach out to master gardeners or certified labs to get information, because they can help you know what to test for and make sure it's being tested accurately.
Yes, and
Also,
that
I
link
have a
just got put in the chat as well.
yes. There was a comment about ground cover answer not satisfactory. I'm not totally sure what that means. Are you asking for recommendations of living ground covers or
Yeah, Beverly, do you want to pop off of mute and or put in the chat? We might have just missed that question, but I'm not sure what that was referring to. Do Beverly, is she still here?
concerned with mulch? I don't know what to say to that. Oh,
So previously she had written, I'd like to see discussion of mulch. Organic mulches cool soil, retain moisture,
ground
and
cover. Oh,
contribute.
ground cover as a substitute for mulch? Yeah, having living ground covers, so green plants that are really low to the ground, functioning as like a living mulch can be a substitute for kind of a dry wood chip mulch. So things like pohewe, akia, any of those kind of like low ground covers can be great alternatives. Even doing some kind of like larger clumping grasses like Carex wahuensis, um, uki uki, things like that, where we're covering more ground space, leaving less real estate for weeds, and then having that living plant there, having living roots. That's all going to help kind of maintain soil moisture as well and keep a hydrated landscape. So, yeah, it's kind of instead of just using that static decomposing material, having that living plant that also will be creating its own kind of leaf litter and mulch itself when it's established. Cool.
Great, thank you. Okay, super. Mahalo, mahalo.
Yes,
It's great
thank
to
you,
be
everyone.
here. It's great to have all of your attention. And yeah, again, if you have additional questions, please reach out.